you are on assignment.
We'll keep increasing saying.
I like people coming early.
Now, a behind-the-scenes look.
Welcome to On Assignment. I'm Imran Siddiqui.
And I'm Aru Pandey. Coming up, an international AIDS conference in Washington reveals some surprising attitudes about the disease.
A territorial dispute in the South China Sea over tiny uninhabited islands.
And a new opera based on one of the deadliest battles of the Iraq War debuts on the internet. Let's go On Assignment. "30 years ago, it was considered a possible catastrophic pandemic, but so much progress has been made in the fight against HIV/AIDS that activists worry today's younger generation may have become too complacent about this deadly disease.
But that was just one of the issues raised at the 2012 AIDS conference held recently in Washington. VOA reporter Suzanne Presto told me the conference brought together thousands of AIDS researchers and doctors, as well as activists and patients suffering from AIDS.
This was the 19th International AIDS Conference, and what happens is it brings together people who are on the front lines of trying to battle HIV/AIDS, people who have HIV, the top policy people in the world, the top researchers in the world. Brings them all together to have a conversation about best practices, the latest in research, what people are experiencing on the front lines, what is really happening in the AIDS community, so that people can put out what the best information is and then be able to work from there.
AIDS Global Village, this was the first, I presume, where you had a chance to talk to a lot of the young crowd over there. What did they have to say?
This was my very first time in the Global Village, so it's a separate level altogether from the convention. You're there, you have lots of high-level speakers who are talking about the latest and what's going on, but down below you have the people who have HIV, the people who are working on the front lines, working with the community organizers. And I have to say, it was one of the most amazing experiences that I've ever had, is to go down there, to go to the different booths, hear all the conversations.
So all of us just grew and manifested from meeting one another and staying connected.
All these people are having the most important conversations that can be had at this moment, and it's all there on one level.
Yes, take as many as you want. The Condomize campaign wants to bring attention to the condom and to remember people that this is one of the most powerful tools we have that people can utilize to remain HIV negative.
So I talked to a number of HIV positive 20-somethings. And if you think about it, AIDS, we first became aware of AIDS in the 1980s. So children who were born in the 1980s have had HIV/AIDS in their lives for their entire lives. And for people who were born perinatally infected, they have had HIV their entire lives and are now in their late 20s, at a point of life where, here in the United States at least, you're contemplating marriage, you're contemplating families.
What would you do right now?
The exercise in this panel discussion: whether to disclose HIV status in a hypothetical relationship. Red means no, green means yes, and yellow means maybe. Christina Jade Pena, who studies public policy in California, recalls the conversation with her first boyfriend back when they were teenagers.
I sat down with him and told him. And it took a long time, it was a long conversation, and he picked me up for a date the next day. And we've been together ever since.
That's 11 years and counting. It's proof that, with proper precautions, young people with HIV can have fulfilling relationships with partners who aren't infected.
They've managed to negotiate being HIV positive while also maintaining happy, healthy relationships in all aspects of their relationship, to the point they're able to talk about now, you know, I want to have a family, I want to have a child, and I can actually do that being on medication and have a child who's born without HIV.
Now, there's so much of progress in terms of fighting HIV. Do you think there's also a sense of complacency, especially with the younger crowd, that, hey, everything's going to be okay, I'll just pop a pill and I'll be perfectly fine?
Without a doubt, and I spoke to one HIV positive man who said to me, people are under the impression that you pop a pill, it's like a vitamin. He said, these are incredibly toxic drugs that we're taking into our system.
And it's one pill with 3 drugs in it. So it's a big pill, it's a big pink pill. And that's my HIV medicine. Then I have to take all of these other medications because of side effects and just having to, you know, having the virus for so long.
In the 1980s and the early 1990s, people were so fired up and so concerned about HIV that people were really concerned about risky behaviors. Now people have gotten very complacent about it, and we see that HIV is rising. Here in DC, the number of people who are HIV positive, it's up there along with Rwanda and Angola.
Let me ask you about Tim Brown.
Timothy Brown was once known in medical journals as the Berlin patient, the man who had HIV, but doesn't anymore.
I don't have any effects from the virus, and I don't have to take medication against the virus.
Brown was living in Berlin when he tested positive for HIV in 1995. He took medications to manage the virus. In 2006, a doctor also diagnosed leukemia. Brown's oncologist, Gero Hutter, knew that 1 out of 100 people, mostly Northern Europeans, are highly resistant to HIV due to a genetic mutation. Simply put, they lack doorways that allow HIV to enter their cells. In 2007, Brown went through total body irradiation and then received a bone marrow transplant from an HIV-resistant donor. He immediately stopped taking HIV medication. Although the leukemia returned, the HIV did not.
There's also an issue of mindset in terms of how do other people see those people who are infected with HIV.
Well, one of the things of the young people that I spoke to said, we hate the phrase HIV positive person. I'm a person with an infection living with HIV. That's the way I want to be.
Yeah, it's like no one goes out and says, hey, you're malaria positive.
Exactly, and that's what they were saying time and time again. 30 years on, it's kind of sad that we're at a point where we have to still talk about humanizing someone who has an infection.
Some interesting insights into the AIDS conference. Our thanks to Suzanne Presto for her coverage.
Coming up, direct from the farm to the table, it's a movement that some believe leads to healthier eating and a more sustainable environment. But first, a short break. You're watching On Assignment.
It's no secret that fresh fruits and vegetables are one of the keys to a healthier lifestyle. Make that locally grown fruits and vegetables, which are usually fresher and possibly tastier than their supermarket cousins. My colleague Sean Burke visited a local farmer's market where much of the produce is organic and of course locally grown. Sean, thanks for joining us. Sure. What is it about locally grown produce that proponents say make it healthier for us?
Well, supporters of the farm-to-table movement believe that if you're buying your produce from a farmer's market, a farm stand, or even a local farm, right, chances are it was harvested within 24 hours of when you buy the produce. And they'll say that if you're buying from supermarkets, that produce could very well be on the shelves for 7 to 14 days. It may have traveled across country to even get there, and over time, the produce loses its nutrients. So they say it's not only fresher to buy from farmers markets, it's also healthier.
All right, well, you went to a farmer's market and met a lot of different people. You also met a local chef. Let's take a look.
It's a summer afternoon in the Washington area, and one of the many weekly farmers markets is now open for business.
Hey, how are you doing?
Vendors from more than 20 farms offer a robust mixture of local produce, and Chef Cahal Armstrong is among the customers.
These are garlic scapes. It's the top of the garlic plant before it goes to flour. Really delicious.
Armstrong is a staunch advocate of small, sustainable farms. Many of his suppliers deliver directly to his restaurants, but he also visits local outdoor markets himself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So where's your restaurant?
In Old Town.
Okay,
yeah.
Excellent. What are you going to make with these?
Something delicious. I don't know yet.
The farm-to-table movement is based on the idea that locally grown food is fresher and healthier. The fresher the ingredients, the better the meal.
We're always going to choose what tastes best over any other principle in our procurement for food. There's a much cleaner, much purer flavor from food that is produced organically.
Armstrong serves seasonally available fruits and vegetables.
This is the best fruiting tree we get.
Armstrong's own love of horticulture convinced him to create an organic garden behind Restaurant Eve. Fruits from his trees, seasonal vegetables, and herbs from his garden are harvested and incorporated into dinner dishes, making it a very short trip indeed from the farm to the table.
Looks delicious, Sean, but what do chefs like Armstrong do in the wintertime when it comes to local produce?
You know, Cahal said to me, you know, Sean, it's true, in the winter we don't have strawberries, we don't have tomatoes, we don't have plums, and the customers know that when they come in, or if they don't, we tell them that. But what we do is they switch over to winter vegetables, parsnips, winter squash, mushrooms, other things, and they adjust the menu to fit the season. Every now and then they do have to get food from out of the area, but he said that's very rare. Usually it's locally grown all the time.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Sean,
Thank you.
with a look at our farm-to-table movement. Well, it's time to take another break, but stay tuned as we go on assignment to the South China Sea with VOA correspondent Daniel Schearf. You're watching On Assignment. I'm Maru Pandey with co-host Imran Siddiqui.
About half a dozen countries have shores on the South China Sea, and most, if not all, lay claim to some parts of it. The most recent territorial dispute is over tiny islands known as the Scarborough Shoals.
Both China and the Philippines say the shoals are within their territorial waters. VOA's Rebecca Ward spoke with Bangkok correspondent Daniel Schearf about the dispute.
Officially, the international community, including the United States and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, does not have a direct position on who controls this territory. But you know, it does seem that a lot of analysts who look at the situation say, okay, Scarborough Shoals, this group of rocky islets, they're quite close to the Philippines. You know, we're talking, you know, a matter of a couple hundred nautical miles, whereas from China, we're talking hundreds of nautical miles. So this is a very big difference. But that's one of the biggest problems with the whole South China Sea dispute, is that China claims almost all of the territory in the South China Sea. So that puts it into conflict with, you know, half a dozen other countries and governments.
I was going to say this isn't the first time that China has gotten to a territorial dispute. Japan, as well as other smaller countries in the area. So how do they resolve that?
Yeah, absolutely, and occasionally it has become quite violent in the past. The biggest dispute, really, although we've seen the Philippines and China in the news lately because of the standoff that occurred over the Scarborough Shoals, most of the dispute, most of the tension is between China and Vietnam. And we saw in the mid-70s actual fighting break out, and dozens of sailors were killed when Vietnam and China, you know, essentially went to battle over the paracels. And that since China basically won that battle and now controls those islets, but the tension is still there, and Vietnam wants international support. They want the ASEAN, Southeast Asian nations also to try and support their position, of course. But it's a very difficult situation. They're going to have to find some way to politically put the claims up on the shelf and say, okay, look, you say it's yours, we say it's ours, let's at least try to cooperate on the resources that are there.
In the disputes, are there other things at play here, maybe oil, maybe gas, that the Chinese and the other nations are after, or is it strictly a matter of, you know, fishing rights?
Well, on the surface, it's over territory. It's historical claims versus international law, and this is what it appears to be. But in reality, of course, when it comes to territory, it's not just about, you know, guarding what's yours. There is a lot of oil that is believed to be under those waters. So oil is a big factor, natural gas, and of course fishing.
As a storm approaches, Filipino fishermen in Masinloc work together to pull their boats out of the water. About 2,000 families here depend on the sea to make a living. But the spat with China at rich fishing grounds in the Scarborough Shoals has taken a toll on their income. Miguel Bitana says in just a few days at the disputed shoals, he could earn what took him a week or more fishing in local waters.
There really is a depletion of fish. It's getting scarcer.
Meanwhile, declining fish stocks around Hong Kong waters have forced fishermen there to venture further into disputed territories, risking conflict and confrontation. Pang Wah Kan is chairman of the Joint Committee of Hong Kong Fishermen's Organizations.
We started fishing in the South China Sea in the 1960s. From then on, several cases are reported that Filipino authorities detained our fishermen and ships and fined them. Some were detained and even confiscated by Malaysian authorities as well.
The standoff started in April when a Philippines Navy ship tried to arrest Chinese fishermen for allegedly harvesting endangered species of sharks and coral. Chinese surveillance boats intervened, and the two sides have since engaged in a war of words. Fishermen on both sides say their governments need to come to an agreement so they can all make a living.
Now let me just ask you, because the Philippines has a pretty substantial Chinese population, or ethnic Chinese population. Are these tensions between China and the Philippines kind of boiling over into the domestic issues going on there?
Yeah, the Philippines does have a very vibrant community of ethnic Chinese. They've been doing trade with China for hundreds of years. It's a very well-established ethnic Chinese community in the Philippines. And it certainly was a concern among the community that tensions might end up creating some problems for them. Fortunately, we didn't see that. We did see demonstrations and protests that took place on the streets of Manila against China, but it was very much against the government of China. It was not against the Chinese or ethnic Chinese.
Directed at the embassy.
Exactly, yeah, right outside of the Chinese embassy. So it's good that they've kept that clear distinction, that this is a political issue, this is between governments and should not be aimed at any ethnic group.
Correspondent Daniel Schearf covers Southeast Asia from VOA's Bangkok Bureau, but we spoke to him while he was here in Washington.
Our next segment takes place in California, but the story really begins in Iraq. VOA's Lisa Vora spoke with Los Angeles Bureau Chief Michael Sullivan about a new opera making its debut on the internet.
I have so much. I have too much to sniper.
The opera Fallujah is inspired by real events. It highlights 72 hours in the life of a U.S. Marine recalling his traumatic experience in Iraq. Charlie Annenberg Weingarten of the internet site explore.org conceived the project.
So Fallujah is based on one of America's most deadly battles and the chaos that ensues when a soldier one day is friends with this young Muslim man, but on the next day, if he sees him, he'll have to kill him.
This is obviously a very hard topic to tackle, to depict this kind of human suffering like that. How did Charlie Annenberg come up with the idea for this opera?
Well, you know, Charlie Annenberg was at a retreat, a fishing retreat, and that's where he, with some veterans who had suffered from PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and that's where he met Christian Ellis. And he got talking to him, and he realized that he was an unusual guy in that he had a background in opera. At least his mother was a professional singer, and he had grown up with opera. And so Charlie Annenberg came up with the idea, why don't we put your story to music and tell it in the form of an opera.
If not you.
The opera was staged and recorded in Vancouver with help from a composer and librettist. For the moment, it's being presented in installments on the internet. It was inspired by the experience of U.S. Marine Corps veteran Christian Ellis, who was changed by what he went through in Fallujah in 2004.
So I took a lot of my own personal experiences that dealt with suicide, that dealt with a lot of dark moments, and turned them into a way that where people can understand.
Can you give me some examples of how they were able to illustrate Ellis's experience?
For the benefit of his friends, guys in his unit, he said he was not going to tell some of the real things that happened, but some of the actual incidents are there. Christian's best friend was shot in the head by a sniper, and he was there and he saw it. And that made a real impact on him, and that's shown in the play. There was also a young guy who, an Iraqi, a 16-year-old Iraqi, who sold DVDs, videos to the troops. And he was killed by insurgents who thought he was cooperating with the Americans. That story is not told directly, but there is a character in the opera, an Iraqi who was killed. And part of the drama involves the mother of the dead Iraqi young guy and the mother of the American Marine, who are singing these laments and in a duet, and it's a very moving part of the opera.
This story is told from both the American and Iraqi perspective. Could you tell me a little bit, how were they able to get the Iraqi perspective?
The main thing they did is they got a librettist, somebody to write the dialogue for the opera, named Heather Raffel, and she's based in New York, and she is Iraqi American. And she is very aware of Iraqi culture. She has her feet, in a sense, in both cultures. and she had done some theater work exploring this theme before. Ellis grew up with opera. He says telling his story in this way was healing.
It's helped me so much that I wish that this kind of therapy was more readily available to veterans. Music, expression.
Did he say anything about how this has helped him?
Yeah, he has lost dozens of close friends, both in combat and through suicide. And he attempted suicide 4 times. But he said, and you can see this in his face as he's listening to this music, that it has really helped him heal. In fact, he says it has done more than the therapy sessions he's been through, because it really kind of gets to the heart of his experience and helps him go through it and come to terms with it.
Yeah, hopefully other people will be inspired to use some sort of creative outlet to heal.
And that's what he said. He said he's discovered just how healing music can be, and he hopes that music plays more of a role in helping veterans, but not only opera, but other forms of music as a form of self-expression.
A very moving story. Our thanks to LA Bureau Chief Mike O'Sullivan for bringing it to our attention.
And bringing that kind of emotion to the stage is also the subject of our next segment. VOA's Jerome Sokolowski reports on a Tony Award-winning play about the early days of the AIDS epidemic. Its production in Washington was timed to coincide with the AIDS conference. Let's take a look.
Mystical electromagnetic fields ruled by the planet Uranus. Yes, we'll certainly keep that in mind. Thank you for calling and sharing that with us.
The normal heart is filling the house these days at Washington's Arena Stage. Patrick Breen plays the main character, Ned Week.
And the play is about the early years in New York City of the AIDS epidemic, before it had a name. It wasn't called anything. It was just an immune disease that seemed to be affecting mostly gay men.
All I know is this disease is the most insidious killer I've ever seen or studied or heard about.
Weeks' character is based on the play's author, Larry Kramer. He co-founded an organization to help AIDS victims, but alienated those he asked for help.
We've been trying to see the mayor for 14 months. It has taken us 1 year just to get this meeting with you, and you are 1 hour and 45 minutes late.
He was not a pleasant guy. People who were in the organization said it. He just yelled, he made them cry all the time because he was saying, you're not doing enough. You're not helping.
I am furious with you!
But Breen says Kramer's anger was necessary.
Because for the most part, you will be ignored if you don't make enough noise. That's just the way politics, administrations, the world probably works.
I am trying to understand why nobody wants to hear we're dying. Why nobody wants to help.
Kramer later founded ACT UP, an activist group that changed the way AIDS victims were treated. Acting student Sam Game says his gay friends believe the general attitude is different now.
And I know a lot of them kind of look back on it and they don't understand as much of the anger that was kind of prevalent back then.
Letter from the playwright, Larry Kramer.
Thank you.
In his letter to spectators, Kramer calls AIDS a plague that need not have happened. But health officials are optimistic that it can be eradicated. One thing this play does demonstrate is how far the discussion about HIV/AIDS has come in this country since the early days of the epidemic. Jerome Sokolowski, VOA News, Washington.
That wraps up our show for this week. Join us again next week as we get an update on diplomatic efforts in Syria.
We'll also talk with the reporter who recently returned from being on assignment in Ethiopia. And remember, you can check out all of our episodes at voanews.com and on Facebook.
Thanks for watching On Assignment. See you next week.